The rain had been falling for hours, not the kind that comes and goes, the kind that settles in, heavy, relentless, the kind that fills a house with white noise and makes you feel like the rest of the world has gone somewhere else entirely. It was past 11 when Marcus set his book down. He wasn't sure what made him look up, not a sound exactly, more like a change in sound, something underneath the rain, something that didn't belong to the storm. He sat still for a moment, listening. There it was again, a faint tapping, rhythmic, deliberate, not a branch against the glass, not the wind working a loose shutter. Something alive was making that sound. Marcus walked to the window slowly. What he saw on the other side of that glass stopped him cold. A cat, but not any cat he had ever seen up close. She was small, smaller than he expected, with thick, damp fur and a wide, flat face that seemed almost ancient. Her eyes were large and pale, catching the porch light in a way that made them glow faintly. Her ears sat low and wide on her head. A Pallas cat, wild, one of the most elusive small cats on earth, an animal that lives its entire life avoiding exactly this, a lit window, a human face, the smell of a house. She was soaked through, and she was looking directly at him, not darting her gaze around, not scanning for escape routes, just looking at him, still, patient, as if she had made a decision before she ever raised her paw to that glass. Marcus didn't move, neither did she. If you've ever found yourself watching a wild animal from a few feet away, really watching, both of you motionless, you know that something shifts in those moments. Time changes, the ordinary world steps back, and for just a few seconds you're not sure who is more surprised. He noticed her front paw first. It was raised slightly off the ground, not in the way a cat needs or stretches, more like a gesture, uncertain, almost asking. Marcus had lived near this forest for 11 years. He had seen deer cross his back field at dusk. Once a fox had sat on his porch railing like it owned the place, but a Pallas cat at his door, in the middle of a rainstorm, raising one paw toward his window. That had never happened. That shouldn't happen. Wild animals don't come to doors. That's the first rule. Every wildlife guide, every naturalist, every person who has ever spent time in remote country knows, if an animal approaches a human, something is wrong. He felt it settle over him then, that specific kind of quiet dread, the moment before you understand something. Marcus reached for the door handle. He opened it 2 inches. Cold air pushed in immediately, carrying the smell of wet earth and pine and rain. The cat stepped back, one careful step, but her eyes stayed fixed on him, alert, wary, but not running. He waited. She waited. The rain came down between them, loud and steady, filling the silence neither of them broke. Then he saw it. She was shivering, not the small, quick trembling of an animal startled. This was deeper, something that moved through her whole body in slow, exhausting waves. Her fur, plastered flat against her sides, revealed how thin she was beneath it. She was weak. This animal, built for cold, built for mountain terrain, built to survive conditions most creatures couldn't, was struggling to stand on his porch in the rain. Something was wrong. Not just tonight wrong. Something had been wrong for a while. Marcus held the door open and stepped back. This was the moment every rational part of him said to stop. Wild animals carry disease. They bite. They panic in enclosed spaces. A Pallas cat was not a stray tabby from down the road. She was not socialized. She was not safe. He knew all of this. He stepped back anyway. The gap in the doorway widened. Warm air drifted out past him into the night. The cat stood at the edge of the porch, soaked and shaking, and for a long moment she didn't move at all. The rain hammered the roof. The porch light caught the water on her fur. She looked at the open door. She looked at Marcus. And everything, every second of what came after, depended on what she did next. She crossed the threshold like she was stepping onto ice. One paw, then another, each movement deliberate, controlled, her body low and close to the ground, the way wild cats move when they aren't sure if they're walking into shelter or a trap. Marcus didn't speak. He didn't reach toward her, didn't crouch down with an outstretched hand the way people do with strays. He understood, somehow, instinctively, that the wrong move right now would undo everything. So he simply stood to the side, back against the wall, arms still, and let her make every decision herself. She paused just inside the doorway, head low, ears flattened slightly, eyes sweeping the room in quick, precise arcs. The couch, the lamp, the hallway, the ceiling, processing, measuring. Her nose worked steadily, pulling in information he couldn't begin to read. The door was still open behind her. Cold air pooled around her wet paws. She could leave. He hadn't closed it, hadn't trapped her. That was important. She stayed. Marcus eased the door shut, slowly, quietly, and moved to the far side of the room without looking directly at her. He had read once that direct eye contact was a threat signal to most wild cats. He wasn't sure if that was true for a palace cat specifically. He wasn't sure about much right now, but it felt right to give her his peripheral vision instead of his full gaze, to make himself smaller in the room without actually moving away. She tracked him the entire time. Then, without warning, she moved. Not toward him, not toward the warmth of the lamp or the softness of the rug. She moved to the corner where the wall met the baseboard heater, the darkest, most enclosed part of the room, and she lowered herself down onto the floor and stayed there. Her eyes were still open, still watching, but the shivering was beginning, slowly, to ease. She hadn't come inside to be rescued. She had come inside to survive. There's a difference. And in that moment, watching her choose a corner over comfort, Marcus understood he was not dealing with an animal that wanted his help. He was dealing with an animal that had run out of other options. He gave her 20 minutes before he looked at her properly. He sat across the room, angled away, pretending to read. Every few minutes he glanced over, brief, casual, the way you'd check a clock. Each time she was watching him. Each time neither of them moved. The rain was still heavy outside. The house was warm now, or warming. The baseboard heater clicked softly. The lamp threw a low amber light across the floor. And that's when Marcus noticed the breathing. He had assumed the heaviness of it was exhaustion, wet fur, cold air, whatever had brought her here. But sitting quietly in the same room, he could hear it, the slight labor in each inhale, the way her sides moved with more effort than they should. He leaned forward slightly. That's when he saw it. Her stomach, low, rounded, moving, not the movement of breathing, something else. A slow, organic shift beneath the surface of her fur, the kind of movement that meant something. Marcus set his book down. He didn't move, didn't say anything out loud, but his mind had already run the numbers and arrived somewhere he hadn't expected. She wasn't just weak. She wasn't just cold or lost or driven to a stranger's door by a storm. She was pregnant, very pregnant from the look of it, the kind of pregnant that meant hours, not days. The kind that explained why she had crossed every instinct a wild animal carries, why she had approached a lit house, why she had stood at a glass door in the rain raising one paw, why she had walked across a human threshold and lain down in a strange corner without fleeing. She hadn't been looking for warmth. She had been looking for shelter, for a safe place to do the most dangerous thing her body was about to ask of her. Marcus moved carefully to the hallway closet. He pulled out 2 old wool blankets, the kind that had been washed too many times and gone soft at the edges, and carried them back to the far side of the room. He didn't bring them to her. He folded them and set them on the floor, halfway between where he was sitting and where she lay, and then he stepped back. She watched every second of this, ears up, eyes fixed, her breathing still heavy but her posture unchanged. He turned the lamp down, quieter light, less exposure, more shadow along the edges of the room. Then he went to the kitchen and came back with a small bowl of water, set it near the blankets, sat back down, said nothing. There was nothing to say. This wasn't a rescue anymore. This was something else, something older and more serious. And both of them in their own way seemed to understand that. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the chair across the room and watched the rain against the windows and listened to the house, the heater, the clock, the steady, effortful breathing from the corner. Around 2 in the morning she shifted, stood up, turned once, slowly, lay back down, but differently, closer to the blankets he had set out. Her body curved inward, her head lower, her breathing changed, deeper, slower, more deliberate. And then, faintly, so faintly that Marcus wasn't certain at first that he had heard it, a sound, low, strained, soft, not a cry, not quite, something between effort and endurance. He sat forward in the chair. The moment had arrived, and he was the only witness, and there was absolutely nothing he could do but stay very still and very quiet, and hoped that whatever happened next went the way it needed to go. Koos turned the lamp down to almost nothing, just enough light to see shapes, outlines, movement. The room settled into shadow and the rain outside softened slightly, as if the storm itself had decided to quiet down for what was coming. He pulled his chair back another foot, gave her more space, more darkness, more of the thing wild animals need most in their most vulnerable moments, the feeling that no one is watching even when someone is. She had moved fully onto the blankets now. Her body was curved tight, her breathing slow and concentrated, her eyes half closed but still occasionally drifting toward him, checking, making sure he hadn't moved, making sure the room was still safe. Every time she looked, he was still. Every time he looked slightly away. This was the only thing he could offer her. Not help, not intervention, just the steady, patient signal that he was not a threat, that she could do what her body needed to do, and he would simply be there, a presence, not a predator. That was all she had asked for when she came to the door. It was all he had to give. The first sound came at 2:30, soft, barely audible beneath the rain, a low, involuntary note that lasted less than a second, the sound of an animal working hard at something it was built to do, but that costs enormously every single time. Marcus didn't move. His hands were flat on his knees. His breathing was slow and deliberate. He was aware, in a way he hadn't been in years, of how loud a human being can be. A shifted foot, a cleared throat, the creak of a chair, and he concentrated on being none of those things. The sound came again, then a pause, then the quiet of the room returned, and in that quiet something had changed, a new texture to the air, a new weight to the stillness. He looked carefully toward the corner. The mother was still, her head bent low, and there, just barely visible in the thin lamplight, something small, something that hadn't been there before. The first kitten was the size of Marcus's fist, dark, damp, impossibly small against the broad, exhausted body of its mother. It moved almost immediately, a slow, searching motion, uncoordinated and urgent, driven entirely by instinct toward warmth. The mother lowered her head. Her rough tongue moved once, twice, deliberate and practiced. The kitten steadied. Its searching slowed into something that looked almost like rest. Marcus let out a long, quiet breath. He hadn't realized he'd been holding it. The second came 30 minutes later, the third sometime before 4 in the morning. Marcus had lost track of exact time, had stopped caring about it. The clock on the wall had become irrelevant. The only time that mattered was the time between sounds, between movements, between the moments when the mother lifted her head and the moments when she lowered it again. He watched her work. There was no other word for it. This was labor in its oldest, most complete sense. Her body doing something enormous, something that took everything she had, without pause, without rest, without anything except the deep biological drive to see it through. She was exhausted. You could see it in the way she moved between kittens, slower each time, her head heavier, her breathing more effortful. She had come a long way before she reached his door. She had done that in the cold and rain, already carrying this weight, already close to this moment. Whatever had happened to her out there, whatever had driven her from the mountain terrain where her kind lived, whatever had separated her from the places she knew, she had kept going, through the storm, up to a lit window, to a door she had never seen before. She had kept going until she found somewhere safe enough to stop. Around 4:30, the room went very quiet. The mother was still. The kittens, 3 of them now, small and dark and pressed against her, were still. The rain outside had softened to something barely audible, and then Marcus noticed the fourth. It was set slightly apart from the others, smaller maybe, or perhaps the same size. It was hard to tell in the low light, but it wasn't moving the way the others were moving. That constant, restless searching that newborns do, that automatic hunger-driven motion. This one was still, too still. Marcus leaned forward in his chair, just slightly, his eyes adjusted to the low light, pulling at the shadows. The mother had noticed too, her head turned toward the small shape, her nose lowering to touch it. Once, twice, nothing. The room felt different in that moment, a different kind of quiet, the kind that has weight to it. Marcus's chest tightened. He had seen enough of the natural world to know what stillness like that usually meant, and he had no way to intervene, no training, no tools, no right to reach into that corner and alter what was happening. He was a witness, that was all. And sometimes being a witness means watching things go the way you don't want them to go. He sat very still. The mother touched her nose to the kitten again. Then, so small he almost missed it, a movement, a single tiny motion, the faintest curl of one small paw. Then a sound, weak, high, barely a sound at all. More like the idea of a sound. The first draft of a cry. The mother responded instantly. Her tongue moved over the kitten in long, steady strokes. More deliberate now, more urgent. The kitten moved again, stronger this time, a full-body shudder that resolved into a stretch, a reach, a slow crawl toward warmth. Marcus pressed his hand flat against his sternum without thinking about it. You do that sometimes. When something lands in you before you've had time to think about it. When relief comes so fast it feels physical. The fourth kitten found its mother's side, tucked in, stilled into the slow, steady breathing of something alive and warm and exactly where it needed to be. By the time pale gray light began to show at the windows, the storm had passed. 4 kittens lay against their mother in the corner of a stranger's living room, each one breathing, each one small and improbable and completely dependent on the exhausted, wild, extraordinary animal that had carried them through a mountain storm to get here. The mother's eyes were closed. Her breathing had finally slowed into something that was unmistakably rest. Marcus sat in his chair across the room, his book still open in his lap to the page he had never turned, watching the slow rise and fall of her sides in the first light of morning. He thought about what she had looked like at the window, soaked, shaking, that one paw raised. He had thought in that moment that he was deciding whether to help her. He understood now that she had already decided. She had chosen his door, his light, his floor, and she had been right. Outside the clouds were breaking. Pale winter sun touched the frost on the grass, and the world that had been dark and loud and relentless all night was suddenly, quietly still. But in the returning light of that morning, a new question settled into the room, something Marcus hadn't thought about, hadn't had time to think about. 4 wild kittens, opening their eyes, in the coming days for the first time, learning what the world was, learning what was safe, learning in those critical early weeks what was home, and what happens when the first thing you learn about the world is a human face. The days after the storm were quiet ones. Marcus rearranged his life around the corner of his living room without quite deciding to. He moved slowly in the mornings, spoke less than usual, even to himself, kept the lamp low in the evenings, cooked without the radio on. Small adjustments, the kind you make without a plan, simply because the situation asks for them. The mother watched all of it. From her corner, her pale eyes tracked him across the room, to the kitchen, to the window, back to his chair. She was always aware of him, always measuring. But the quality of her attention had shifted since that first night. It was less urgent now, less poised for flight. She wasn't relaxed. She was wild. Wild animals don't relax around humans. Not truly, not completely. But there is a state between fear and comfort that some animals find, given enough time and enough stillness from the person sharing their space. She had found that state, and Marcus had learned to live inside it carefully, the way you learn to move around something fragile, not because it would break, but because it deserved that kind of attention. A month mentorate says, the kittens changed everything about the room. By the end of the first week, their eyes were beginning to open, slow, uncertain, taking in light for the first time with the particular unfocused wonder of creatures who have no framework yet for what they're seeing. They were extraordinary. Even at that size, small enough to cup in one hand, they had the wide, flat faces of their mother, the low, broad ears, the thick fur already coming in dense and layered. They moved in the stumbling, determined way of all newborns, pawing over each other, collapsing, rising, trying again. Marcus watched them from across the room. He never reached for them, never placed himself between the mother and her kittens. He understood, and this understanding came from somewhere quieter than logic, that the trust she had extended to him was specific and fragile and easily broken. It covered his presence in the room. It did not cover his hands near her young. So he watched, and slowly, carefully, the kittens began to watch back. The smallest one noticed him first. It happened on the 9th day. Marcus had counted, without meaning to, when the smallest kitten crawled to the edge of the blankets and sat there, unsteady, looking out at the room with wide, pale eyes, looking at Marcus. He stayed very still. The kittens stared at him the way young animals stare at new things, with total absorption, no self-consciousness, no framework for what it was seeing, just pure, unfiltered attention. Then it turned around and crawled back to its mother. But the next morning, it came to the edge of the blankets again, and the morning after that, each time a little steadier, each time staying a little longer, each time returning to its mother not in a panic but simply because that was where warmth was, where food was, where everything it needed still lived. But it kept looking back at Marcus, and Marcus kept being there to look at. The mother began eating on the 12th day. He had set out food carefully, not pet food, not anything processed. He had driven 40 minutes to a butcher and come back with small pieces of raw meat, which he placed in a bowl near the blankets each evening and removed each morning whether or not she had touched them. She hadn't touched them, not for 11 days. On the 12th morning, the bowl was empty. Marcus stood in the kitchen doorway looking at it for a long moment. He didn't say anything. He went and filled it again, set it back down, and returned to his chair. That was the whole moment. Nothing dramatic, just an empty bowl that meant she was going to be all right, that they all were. Sometimes the most important things in the world look exactly like an empty bowl. The weeks passed the way weeks do when you're paying attention to something small and real. The kittens grew. Their movements became more purposeful, their curiosity wider. They began exploring, cautiously at first, in tight circles around their mother, then wider arcs across the blankets, then tentative steps onto the wooden floor, which seemed to surprise them every time with its hardness. The mother watched all of this from her corner, alert, present, her eyes moving constantly over her young, tracking each one, noting distance, noting direction. When one wandered too far toward Marcus, she would make a sound, low, barely audible, and it would return. She was teaching them something. Marcus understood that, even if he couldn't read the full lesson. She was showing them the shape of safe space, where the edges were, what to approach and what to observe from a distance. She was teaching them to be wild, even here, even inside four walls with a heater clicking in the corner and a human being sitting 20 feet away. She had never stopped being what she was, and she was making sure they wouldn't either. He noticed the change in her about a month in. It was subtle at first. She began spending time near the window, not pacing, not agitated, but still, looking out at the tree line beyond the glass, watching the field in the early morning when the frost was still on the grass. The kittens were bigger now, more coordinated, more independent. They still nursed, still slept in a pile against their mother's side, but they spent longer periods exploring on their own. Their personalities were already distinct, one cautious and observant, one restless and bold, one that seemed to sleep more than the others, one that always came closest to Marcus's chair before turning back. The smallest one, the one that had watched him first. Marcus had not named any of them. He had made that decision early, quietly, without discussing it with anyone. Names were for animals that were staying. Names were a kind of claim. And he had known from the first night, had known when he stepped aside at that open door, that staying was never part of this. But knowing something and feeling it are different things. And as the weeks had passed, the distance between those two things had been quietly shrinking. One morning he woke to find the mother standing at the front door, not scratching at it, not vocalizing, just standing there, her body facing the door, her tail low and still, waiting. Marcus stood in the hallway for a moment, watching her. The kittens were awake behind her, moving around the blankets, watching their mother with the particular attention young animals give to the behavior of adults, reading it, filing it, learning. He walked to the door. She stepped back, giving him room. He put his hand on the handle and looked at her one last time. This animal who had come to his window in a storm with one paw raised and changed the shape of his winter completely. And she looked back at him with her wide, pale, ancient eyes, not asking any more. Ready. He opened the door. Cold morning air moved into the house, carrying pine and frost and the particular clean smell of the world after a long season of cold. The mother walked out. No hesitation, no pause at the threshold. She moved through the door and onto the porch and down the 2 wooden steps and into the frost-covered grass with the quiet certainty of an animal returning to something it had never fully left. The kittens followed, one by one, stumbling slightly on the steps, ears up and eyes wide at the bigness of the outside world. They stayed close to their mother, pressing against her sides, their paws finding the cold ground for the first time and lifting quickly in surprise, then adjusting, then moving forward. Marcus stood in the open doorway, his hand still on the handle, watching them cross the field toward the tree line. At the edge of the grass, just before the trees began, the mother stopped. She turned back once. Her eyes found Marcus across the distance, steady, clear, unhurried. The same gaze she had fixed on him through the rain-streaked glass that first night, the gaze that had asked him, without words, without certainty, whether he could be trusted with something irreplaceable. He had been. She turned and walked into the trees. The kittens followed, disappearing one by one into the shadows until the field was empty and still, and the only sound was the light wind moving through the frost-covered grass. Marcus stood in the doorway for a long time. The cold moved around him and he let it. He looked at the empty field and the tree line and the pale winter sky above it, and he thought about the night she had come to his door. The rain, the tapping, the moment he had seen her face through the glass and felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. He had thought, in that moment, that the decision was his. He understood now that it had always been hers. She had chosen him, his light, his door, his floor, his careful stillness across a room. She had read something in him, or in the light he cast, in the particular quality of that lit window on that dark and rainy night, and she had made a decision based on whatever wild animals use to make the decisions that keep them alive. And she had been right. I've thought about that a lot since, about what she saw, about what she was looking for. I don't think she was looking for someone who could fix things. I don't think she needed that. I think she was looking for someone who would simply stay still, stay quiet, hold the door open and step aside. And in that storm I thought I was saving a life, but she was the one who knew where to go. She was the one who walked through the door. And what I witnessed, in that corner, in that lamplight, through that long night and all the quiet weeks that followed, was something I had no name for then and have no better name for now. Only that it felt like a privilege, only that it changed something in me that hasn't changed back. And I don't think it will.